The first signs came quietly. At first, it was just small blips on screens in observatories scattered across the world. Scientists noticed strange energy pulses coming from the depths of space, signals that didn't match anything humanity had cataloged. Satellites began acting strangely, their data corrupted for no apparent reason. In a research facility far from any city, a team of scientists watched their monitors with growing unease. They had spent years scanning the skies for new stars, comets, or distant planets, but this felt different. Something was approaching Earth, and it was powerful enough to affect instruments even millions of kilometers away. At the same time, amateur astronomers in remote locations began reporting unusual objects in the night sky, small, fast-moving shapes appearing and disappearing in ways that defied normal physics. Most of the world ignored these reports at first, dismissing them as glitches or misidentifications. But the scientists knew better. The patterns were too precise, too consistent to be random. Whatever it wasn't something naturally occurring. It was intelligence, and it was watching. Across the globe, governments started to notice anomalies in their satellites and communications networks. For most people, it was subtle at first. Minor GPS errors, unexplained power surges, and strange atmospheric readings. But for intelligence agencies and space agencies, it was alarming. Something was out there. Something massive. And it was moving closer to Earth. In the middle of this growing tension, a young physicist working late at a university lab noticed an odd pattern in the incoming data. The energy pulses weren't random. They were rhythmic, almost like signals being sent deliberately. He called in his colleagues, and together they began decoding the pulses. Hours turned into days as they worked tirelessly, tracking the origin of the signals. And finally, they realized the unthinkable. The pulses were coming from a distant part of the galaxy, from a place where no human ship had ever been. Something, or someone, was coming toward them. Meanwhile, in the vastness of space far beyond Earth, the empire that had been monitoring the small blue planet for decades made its move.
In their councils, leaders debated quietly about the strange world they had discovered.
To them, Earth was insignificant, a minor planet in a distant corner of the galaxy. But it had something they wanted, something rare and valuable. After long deliberation, they made a decision that would change the fate of humanity forever. They would send the signals and probes as a warning, and if necessary, they would bring out their ultimate weapon, a planet-sized warship that had remained dormant for centuries. On Earth, ordinary people remained unaware of what was happening. Families went about their lives, children played in the streets, and people rushed to work, oblivious to the silent observers approaching from light years away. Scientists and military personnel were the first to realize the scale of the threat, but even they struggled to convey the urgency. How do you warn the world about something it cannot see? How do you prepare billions of people for a force they cannot even imagine? In the meantime, the signals continued to grow stronger. The rhythmic pulses became more intense, affecting more satellites, creating small but noticeable disturbances in the atmosphere. Airplanes experienced minor navigational errors, and ships in the oceans reported unusual magnetic interference. Slowly, the world started to notice that something was amiss. News outlets picked up on the anomalies, framing them as strange but harmless events. Scientists tried to push the story further, to get governments and the public to pay attention, but few truly grasped the danger. One night, the young physicist was still in the lab, staring at the patterns on his screens. He had been working for days with almost no sleep, driven by a mix of curiosity and fear. Suddenly, the patterns shifted. The pulses became faster, more complex, as if someone or something was acknowledging that Earth had noticed. He realized then that this was no longer a passive observation. The Empire was aware of humanity, and it was beginning to take action. Back on the Empire's ships, their scouts observed Earth through powerful lenses and sensors. They recorded every detail: the atmosphere, the oceans, the continents, even the subtle movements of human cities. To the humans watching the skies, these vessels were invisible, yet to the Empire, every detail mattered. They debated internally whether humanity should be approached with caution or dominated outright. But their decision had already been made in the council chambers. Earth would not remain hidden, and if necessary, the dormant warship would be activated. On Earth, a small team of government officials began emergency meetings. The anomalies could no longer be ignored. Satellites were failing, communications were being disrupted, and strange patterns in the sky were being observed in multiple locations at once. The officials realized that whatever was approaching was not a comet, not a meteor, and not a natural event. It was intelligent. It was watching them, and it had power beyond anything humanity had ever faced. Meanwhile, in remote parts of the world, amateur astronomers captured glimpses of enormous shapes moving silently through the sky. Some were terrified, believing these were alien visitors. Others were skeptical, attributing it to experimental military aircraft. But the images were real and they circulated online, sparking debates, theories, and growing anxiety. Humanity was starting to wake up to the idea that it was not alone in the universe. The young physicist finally presented his findings to global space agencies. The patterns, he explained, were deliberate attempts to communicate, or at least to observe. The timing, the intensity, and the structure of the pulses indicated intelligence far beyond human capability. It was not a threat yet, he warned, but it could become one. Governments listened, alarmed but unsure how to respond. What could they do against a force that existed beyond their understanding, beyond their technology, beyond their imagination? As the world struggled to grasp the magnitude of the situation, the Empire continued its preparations. Ships were repositioned, and fleets were readied for deployment. Deep within the command chambers, leaders monitored Earth's response with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They had encountered many civilizations across the galaxy, and most were easy to subdue. But there was something about this small blue planet, about the resilience and unpredictability of its inhabitants that made them pause. Still, the warship remained on standby, a silent promise of destruction if Earth did not comply. Back on Earth, life carried on as usual for most people. Children went to school, markets were busy, and cities buzzed with the usual activity. But behind closed doors, scientists, military officers, and government leaders worked tirelessly. They prepared for scenarios they had never imagined, studied patterns in the signals, and ran simulations to predict the Empire's next moves. Humanity was waking up, slowly, to a reality far larger than itself. And in the darkness of space, the Empire's eyes remained fixed on Earth. Every pulse, every signal, every flicker of activity was noted. Their decision to awaken the warship would not come lightly, but the seeds were planted. Humanity's fate was no longer in its own hands. Something ancient, vast, and unimaginably powerful had discovered them, and soon, the true test of human resilience and ingenuity would begin. By the end of the first days of discovery, humanity had changed. The ordinary life of billions had been interrupted, not by direct contact, but by the awareness that they were being watched. Fear, curiosity, and determination mixed together. Scientists worked longer hours, governments communicated more urgently, and people began to question what they thought they knew about the universe. Earth was no longer a quiet, insignificant planet. It had drawn the attention of an empire that spanned countless stars, and with that attention came danger, awe, and the first hints of a story that would change life on the planet forever. The world did not yet understand the scale of what was coming. Few realized that the signals were only the beginning, the first ripple of an event that would test every limit of human courage and ingenuity. And somewhere in the depths of space, the Empire's warship waited, dormant but ready, a silent giant whose awakening could bring either the end or the evolution of humanity. The discovery of the signals had shaken Earth, but it was only the beginning. While scientists worked tirelessly to understand the source, far away in the vastness of space, the empire that had found Earth began to discuss their next steps. Unlike anything humanity had imagined, these leaders were part of an ancient civilization that had dominated countless worlds. Their technology was beyond comprehension. Their fleets were massive, and their weapons were capable of destroying entire planets. Yet, for all their power, they had rules. They rarely destroyed planets without reason. But Earth was different. It was small, resource-rich, and unpredictable. That combination made it a potential threat if left unchecked. The Empire's council convened in a chamber that seemed to float in the void of space. Their walls glimmered with holographic maps of the galaxy, each planet marked with careful precision. One by one, leaders presented their observations of Earth. They had watched for decades, quietly monitoring the planet's signals, its development, and now its reactions to the strange pulses they had sent. To the humans, it might have seemed like distant stars blinking harmlessly, but to the Empire, Earth's responses revealed a clever and resilient species. They noted the planet's rapid technological progress, the unpredictability of its governments, and the ingenuity of its people. After hours of deliberation, the Council reached a decision. The signals alone had not provoked the humans directly, but they had alerted them to the Empire's presence. Earth was aware now, and that awareness was dangerous. A dormant weapon, a planet-sized warship built centuries ago and left untouched, was activated in a quiet, calculated decision. The ship had not moved in generations. Its size alone was unimaginable, a floating city of metal and energy designed to impose power on an entire planet if needed. Yet, despite its destructive potential, the Empire did not activate it fully yet. They would wait, observe, and only if necessary would they use it. The mere awakening of the warship sent subtle signals across space, signals that even humans would eventually notice. Back on Earth, the signals continued to increase in strength. Satellites flickered and failed, and high-frequency communications began to break down. Scientists, now working around the clock, tried to isolate the cause. They realized that these anomalies were not random. They were deliberate. Someone or something was sending powerful energy patterns into the solar system. The young physicist who had first decoded the signals presented his findings to global space agencies, explaining that Earth had been detected by an incredibly advanced intelligence. The words he spoke were measured, careful, but the underlying warning was clear. Humanity was no longer hidden, and their very presence had been noticed. Governments began to respond, cautiously at first. Emergency meetings were held, though the scale of the threat was hard to comprehend. Some leaders wanted to prepare for diplomacy, while others advocated defensive measures. Military advisors warned that Earth's current arsenal was negligible compared to what the Empire could bring. Satellites armed with conventional weapons were useless. Nuclear weapons, as powerful as they were, would barely scratch the surface of a planet-sized warship. Scientists suggested studying the energy patterns further, looking for vulnerabilities. Yet even with all the planning, the truth remained. Humanity had no real way to fight an opponent so far beyond their reach. Meanwhile, the Empire's warship, slowly awakening, began to project a presence that humans could feel but not yet fully see. Electromagnetic disturbances spread through Earth's upper atmosphere. Power grids experienced small surges, satellites were briefly knocked offline, and compasses sometimes malfunctioned in isolated areas. These were subtle, almost unnoticeable signs to the general public, but for scientists they were proof that the warship had started its awakening process. Even before humans could fully grasp the scale of the threat, the Empire was testing Earth's response. They wanted to see how resilient and adaptable the humans were, to determine if direct action was necessary. In remote areas, amateur astronomers noticed faint outlines moving across the sky. Strange reflections of light, almost imperceptible, were caught on cameras designed to capture distant stars. The images were shared online, and although many dismissed them as hoaxes, a growing number of people began to realize that something extraordinary was happening. Discussions and debates erupted across forums and news channels. Was it a new type of satellite? An experimental military craft? Or was it truly something extraterrestrial? The truth, far stranger than anyone could imagine, was that these faint outlines were parts of the warship's external systems, beginning to engage with the space around it. Amid all this, scientists in observatories across the globe worked tirelessly to understand the energy pulses. They mapped the patterns, comparing them to known astronomical phenomena, but nothing matched. Each discovery led to more questions. The data suggested immense energy output, far beyond anything produced naturally. The pulses were structured, deliberate, almost like a communication, but the language was alien, the code beyond human comprehension. Yet despite the complexity, the scientists found glimpses of predictability, hints that could be interpreted. Humanity was beginning to learn not just that it was being watched, but that it was being studied carefully. On Earth, news of the anomalies began reaching the public, though governments were careful not to incite panic. Reports spoke of unexplained satellite malfunctions and strange electromagnetic events. People noticed GPS devices acting strangely, power surges causing temporary blackouts, and planes experiencing navigation anomalies. Conspiracy theories flourished, but beneath them, a quiet fear began to settle over humanity. Something was out there, something far beyond their understanding, and it was moving closer every day. Meanwhile, the Empire's Council continued to monitor Earth. They studied not just technology, but culture, politics, and even psychology. Humans were unpredictable, emotional, and resilient, qualities that the Empire found fascinating. They observed how quickly humans adapted to small threats, how communication and cooperation increased in times of stress, and how innovation often arose from necessity. These observations influenced their decision-making. They did not underestimate humanity, but neither did they fear them yet. The Warship, massive and dormant, remained in standby mode, a looming potential that could tip the balance at any moment. Earth scientists tried to convey urgency, presenting their findings to military leaders and global organizations. They warned that the anomalies were the work of an intelligence far more advanced than anything humans had encountered. They spoke of the warship's potential, the likelihood that it could be activated fully, and the need for a global response. Yet even with evidence, many struggled to believe the scale of the threat. Humanity had no experience with civilizations that spanned galaxies, and the idea of a planet-sized warship was almost impossible to grasp. As the world watched and waited, subtle changes continued. The electromagnetic disturbances intensified slightly. Satellites recorded strange patterns in energy fields, and the sky sometimes shimmered with unnatural reflections at night. People in different parts of the world noticed unusual weather events, unexplained surges in auroras, and fleeting lights that appeared in the sky for only moments. These events sparked wonder, fear, and speculation. Humanity was becoming aware of its place in a much larger universe, and the sense of vulnerability was palpable. The young physicist, exhausted but determined, coordinated with colleagues across continents. Data from observatories, satellites, and even amateur astronomers were compiled to form a global picture of the threat. They realized that Earth's survival might depend on cooperation on a scale never attempted before. Borders, politics, and disputes suddenly seemed insignificant in the face of an intelligence that could render all human conflict meaningless. For the first time in history, humanity had to think collectively, not just as nations but as a species. In space, the Empire's warship continued its slow, deliberate awakening. Its massive engines stirred faintly, sending out energy waves that subtly altered the space around Earth. The Empire's Council watched carefully, noting every human reaction. Every government meeting, every scientific discovery, every unusual event on the planet was recorded and analyzed. The Empire was not hasty. They were patient, calculating. They had seen civilizations rise and fall across countless worlds. Yet Earth, small and seemingly fragile, had drawn their attention in a way few others had. Its unpredictability made it both interesting and potentially dangerous. By the end of these early days, humanity had changed. People were beginning to notice that the world was not as simple as it had seemed. Scientists, governments, and ordinary people alike were experiencing a new awareness, a recognition that they were part of a larger universe, that their actions mattered in ways they had never imagined. Fear mingled with curiosity, anxiety with determination. Humanity had been discovered, and the Empire's awakening warship was a silent reminder that the balance of power in the galaxy could shift at any moment. And so, life on Earth continued, yet nothing was the same. The ordinary routines of daily life carried on, but beneath them a quiet tension lingered. People went to work, children played, markets bustled, but somewhere in the vast darkness, the warnings had become impossible to ignore. For the first time, governments and scientists realized that Earth was facing an intelligence far beyond anything humanity had encountered before. The signals and disturbances were no longer just anomalies, they were a message. The Empire had noticed them, and they were aware of humanity's existence. Fear spread quickly through corridors of power, but alongside it grew determination. For the first time in history, nations had to put aside their differences and think as one species. Military leaders convened in secure underground bunkers. Scientists and strategists presented their data in ways that even the most skeptical officials could understand. Satellites, radar stations, and telescopes all painted the same story. Something massive, intelligent, and powerful was watching. They could not see the Empire's warship in full. It remained hidden in the dark reaches of space, but the energy pulses and subtle disturbances indicated its presence. No conventional weapons would be effective. Humanity's first task was not to attack, but to understand and prepare. Scientists from every corner of the globe worked together, sharing data and insights in a way that had never happened before. They analyzed the energy patterns, trying to determine the Empire's intentions. Were these signals a warning, a test, or a preparation for something far more destructive? The answer remained unclear. Yet the urgency was undeniable. Time was slipping away, and humanity had to act before the warship's activation became irreversible. At the same time, ordinary citizens began noticing strange events. Power outages, strange lights in the sky, and occasional electromagnetic pulses were becoming more common. Some people were afraid, some curious, but almost everyone sensed that something extraordinary was happening. News outlets began covering these anomalies, often sensationally, but behind the stories was a growing awareness. Humanity was no longer alone. Even without direct contact, the Empire's presence had changed life on Earth forever. In the research labs, scientists worked around the clock to model the warship's potential. Using every piece of data available, from the energy pulses to the subtle gravitational anomalies, they built simulations to predict the ship's behavior. They studied its possible weaknesses, searching for a way to defend Earth. It was a race against time. Every delay could mean that the warship would awaken fully, and if that happened, humanity had no hope of direct confrontation. The Empire, meanwhile, watched silently. From their distant vantage point, they observed Earth's reaction with interest. Humans were unpredictable, and their capacity for adaptation surprised even a civilization that had monitored countless worlds. The Empire noted the coordination, the rapid sharing of information, and the growing collaboration across nations. To them, this species was small and fragile, yet resourceful and curious. It was not yet a threat, but it had the potential to be. Earth's first response was defensive. Nations deployed satellites equipped with early warning systems, attempting to track any objects approaching the planet. Military forces began testing advanced missile systems and energy-based weapons in orbit. Even though these efforts would likely have limited effect against a planet-sized warship, they were necessary for morale and for preparation. Humanity needed to act, to show that it would not simply wait to be destroyed. Scientists also began considering unconventional strategies. Some proposed using the warship's energy pulses against it, hoping to disrupt its systems remotely. Others explored high-energy physics experiments that could potentially interfere with its control mechanisms. Ideas were debated, tested, and discarded, but each effort brought humanity closer to understanding the magnitude of the challenge. The work was exhausting, but it also united people in a way that nothing else could. For the first time, humanity faced a truly common threat, and for the first time, global collaboration became essential. As the days passed, the energy pulses grew stronger. Satellites began to experience minor failures more frequently, and some spacecraft in low Earth orbit had to adjust their trajectories to avoid interference. Even though the public remained largely unaware of the full scope, rumors and sightings spread. Lights in the sky, unexplained sounds, and fleeting anomalies became topics of discussion everywhere. Humanity was waking up to a reality far larger than itself, and the collective anxiety was palpable. The Empire's warship continued its slow activation. Hidden deep in space, it projected energy waves that subtly affected the solar system. Gravity fields shifted imperceptibly, and electromagnetic disturbances rippled through satellites and communication systems. To humans, these effects were small but alarming. To the Empire, they were a way to observe how the species would respond. Their goal was not yet destruction but evaluation. How would humans react when faced with an intelligence vastly superior to their own? How quickly could they adapt, organize, and survive? In response, Earth scientists developed new protocols. International space organizations began sharing real-time data with military forces and research labs. Simulations of potential engagement scenarios were created, analyzing everything from the warship's theoretical size and energy output to its possible control systems. The work was painstaking, but humanity had no other choice. The species had never faced a threat like this, and every observation, every calculation, could make the difference between survival and annihilation. At the same time, people everywhere began to notice subtle changes in their daily lives. Navigation systems on planes experienced small anomalies. High-frequency communications sometimes faltered. Power surges caused temporary blackouts in cities around the world. Though these disruptions were minor, they reinforced the sense that something was changing. Humanity was beginning to feel the presence of the Empire, even without seeing the warship itself. Within the research facilities, a sense of urgency mixed with awe. Scientists marveled at the scale of the technology they were facing, and yet fear tempered their curiosity. For every calculation that predicted a possible defense strategy, there were dozens that showed total failure. The gap between human technology and that of the Empire was staggering. And yet humans continued to try. The spirit of ingenuity, resourcefulness, and persistence that had defined the species for millennia now became the cornerstone of their defense. Military leaders coordinated with scientists to develop contingency plans. Evacuation protocols were drafted for key cities. Critical infrastructures were fortified and communications networks were redesigned to withstand interference. Even though no one expected these measures to stop the warship directly, they were necessary for survival. Humanity needed to prepare for every possible outcome, no matter how improbable it seemed. Meanwhile, the Empire continued to monitor. The Council noted every human response, the simulations, the experiments, the military preparations, and even the public reactions. Humans were clever, resilient, and unpredictable. They could adapt quickly, and they were beginning to understand that their survival might depend on unity and collaboration. The Empire was impressed but also cautious. The warship remained in standby mode, a silent threat looming over the planet, ready to be activated if humans pushed too far. The young physicist and his colleagues began to notice patterns in the Empire's energy pulses that suggested intelligence behind them. The signals were not random. They were testing Earth's defenses and reactions. Each fluctuation, each interference seemed to provoke a small adjustment by human satellites and equipment. Humanity was learning, albeit slowly, that it was not just a passive observer. Their actions mattered. Every decision, every experiment, every response contributed to the bigger picture the Empire was observing. As the weeks went by, the world began to change. Governments that had long been at odds started cooperating on an unprecedented scale. Scientists, engineers, and strategists shared knowledge openly, prioritizing survival over rivalry. Ordinary people, sensing the unusual events in the sky, began to prepare in small ways, stockpiling supplies, building shelters, and staying informed. A collective consciousness emerged. Humanity was facing something far beyond its current understanding, and it had to rise to the challenge. Even with all these preparations, there was still fear. Humanity knew that if the Empire decided to use the warship, there would be no way to stop it. Yet this fear did not paralyze them. It motivated them. They worked harder, thought faster, and collaborated more closely than ever before. Each small victory, a stabilized satellite, a successful experiment, a better prediction of energy pulses, was celebrated. Humanity's determination became a force in itself, a reminder that even against overwhelming odds, they would not surrender easily. The Empire, watching from afar, took note of this resilience. Humans were fragile, but they were resourceful. They adapted quickly, learned from mistakes, and communicated in ways that allowed them to act collectively. The Council debated internally. Should they wait longer, continue observing, or take direct action? For now, they chose observation. The warship would remain dormant, but the energy pulses would continue. Every human action was being recorded, analyzed, and understood. The Empire was learning about the species that had captured its attention, and the humans, unknowingly, were shaping the decisions that would affect their own survival. By the end of these weeks, humanity had changed. The calm that humanity had clung to for weeks began to shatter. At first it was subtle, a faint disturbance in the magnetic field, unusual auroras glowing in skies where they should not appear, satellites failing at random. Scientists recorded these changes with growing alarm, realizing that the Empire's warship was no longer dormant in any sense. It had begun a slow, deliberate activation, unseen but palpable. The subtle signals humanity had studied for so long were now part of something much larger, something that could no longer be ignored. Military forces around the world began to notice odd readings from radar and space monitoring systems. Small anomalies in orbital patterns and energy fluctuations suggested that the warship was not only awake, but testing its environment. The ship's presence was enormous beyond anything imaginable. Though it was millions of kilometers away, its energy output affected satellites, communications, and even the upper atmosphere. For the first time, humans felt the scale of the threat, not through direct sight, but through the invisible fingerprints left in their technology in the sky. Scientists raced to understand the warship's patterns. Its energy pulses were no longer simple signals. They were structured, complex, and rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. It was as if the warship itself was alive, calculating, observing, and probing Earth's defenses. Teams of engineers, physicists, and mathematicians worked in shifts, analyzing every pulse, every fluctuation, every anomaly. The young physicist who had first discovered the signals led a task force dedicated to interpreting these new developments. They realized that the warship's systems were vast and interconnected, and that humanity would have to think in entirely new ways if they hoped to survive. Governments and international coalitions held emergency meetings. The realization was chilling. Earth's combined military forces, even with nuclear weapons and advanced technology, were almost powerless against the warship. The world's arsenals, built to fight wars on the planet or in low orbit, were insignificant compared to a weapon of this scale. The only options were preparation, adaptation, and strategic thinking. Humanity faced a choice: react emotionally and risk catastrophe, or plan carefully and hope that intelligence and ingenuity could compensate for the overwhelming disparity in power. At the same time, ordinary people noticed changes in the skies. Faint, shimmering lights appeared in places where they had never been seen before. Satellites glimmered as if reflecting invisible rays. Communication systems experienced brief, unexplained failures. Cities experienced sudden but minor power surges. Though no one could explain these phenomena fully, the sense of unease grew. People whispered about strange happenings, shared videos online, and began to feel that something monumental was approaching. Fear mingled with fascination. Humanity was waking to a reality far larger than itself. The Empire's warship, meanwhile, continued to expand its presence in space. Massive energy generators powered up, sending waves of radiation and gravitational distortions outward. Tiny fragments of the ship's systems began interacting with Earth's satellites and communications networks, testing reactions, observing responses, and subtly shaping human understanding. To the Empire, this was not yet an act of war. It was a demonstration of power, a test to measure human ingenuity and resilience. They were patient, calculating, and meticulous, but the warship's awakening made it clear: should humanity act recklessly, consequences would be immediate and devastating. In response, Earth's leaders pushed humanity to prepare for the unimaginable. Scientists and engineers accelerated research into energy manipulation, orbital defense systems, and advanced computational simulations. Military forces rehearsed emergency protocols. Civilian populations were quietly briefed on unusual phenomena, while governments coordinated to prevent widespread panic. Humanity's first goal was survival, and survival meant understanding the warship, learning its patterns, and developing strategies that could make even a small difference against overwhelming power. The first direct evidence of the warship's operational power came through satellites. One research satellite, designed to monitor cosmic energy fluctuations, recorded a brief but intense surge. It was unlike anything seen before, an energy burst that disrupted electronics across a small region of Earth for a few seconds. Scientists realized immediately that this was no natural phenomenon. It was a demonstration of the warship's capabilities. Even without firing weapons, the sheer scale of energy it could project made conventional defense futile. Humanity was seeing for the first time a glimpse of the weapon it faced. The Empire's warship was not only massive but intelligent. Its systems responded to human activity, adjusting energy outputs and observing reactions. Satellites that attempted to measure its size were momentarily overloaded. Communication systems that tried to broadcast signals toward space were disrupted. Even Earth's most advanced telescopes found themselves challenged by faint distortions in space-time surrounding the ship. Humanity was learning the hard way that conventional thinking was useless against such a behemoth. Creative, adaptive solutions would be required. Solutions that would push human ingenuity to its limits. As these events unfolded, Scientists began theorizing about possible weak points in the warship. By analyzing subtle patterns in its energy emissions, they hypothesized that its control nodes might be centralized, interconnected, but not invulnerable. They debated strategies to exploit these vulnerabilities: high-energy pulses aimed at specific points, coordinated orbital maneuvers to disrupt energy patterns, or even the use of experimental quantum technology. Every idea carried enormous risk, and the margin for error was minimal. Yet for the first time there was a glimmer of hope. Humanity might not be able to stop the warship completely, but it could find ways to delay, disrupt, or confuse it long enough to survive. Meanwhile, the Empire continued to observe. From their perspective, Earth's actions were remarkable. The speed at which humans organized, shared information, and adapted to the growing threat was impressive. In countless worlds across the galaxy, civilizations had crumbled in the face of fear, but humans were proving resourceful and resilient. They were unpredictable, willing to act boldly even when understanding was limited. The Empire's Council debated whether to push humanity further or continue to test. For now, patience won. The warship would continue to awaken gradually, revealing more of its power while giving humanity opportunities to learn and adapt. On Earth, ordinary life continued alongside these extraordinary events. People went to work, children attended schools, and cities functioned normally. But the sense of underlying tension was universal. Conversations often turned to strange lights in the sky, intermittent power surges, and the unusual auroras. People shared theories, some plausible, some fantastical. Even without understanding the full scope, humanity was learning to coexist with uncertainty. Daily life and preparation existed side by side, a balance that underscored both vulnerability and resilience. The young physicist and his team continued to lead the charge. They coordinated international efforts, sharing data, testing simulations, and exploring unconventional solutions. The task was overwhelming. The scale of the warship, its intelligence, and its energy output were beyond any human experience. Yet the team pressed on. They studied the faint signals, trying to discern patterns that could hint at vulnerabilities. Every insight was precious. Every error could be fatal. Humanity's survival depended not only on technology, but on patience, observation, and ingenuity. As the warship's presence grew, so did humanity's understanding of collaboration. Scientists, military strategists, engineers, and technicians shared knowledge freely across borders. Rivalries were set aside, replaced by a collective mission: survival. Ordinary people contributed as well, offering observations, technological suggestions, and creative solutions. Humanity's global consciousness had expanded, driven by necessity, fear, and hope. For the first time, survival depended not on a single nation or group, but on the species acting as one. By now, the Empire's warship had completed most of its initial activation. The massive energy generators hummed with power, and subtle gravitational distortions rippled outward. Satellites, space stations, and even ground-based observatories experienced minor, but undeniable effects. Humanity was feeling the presence of the warship in tangible ways. Fear was widespread, but so was determination. People realized that they were witnessing a force beyond imagination, and yet they also realized that surrender was not an option. The warship had revealed its power, and humanity had begun to respond. Scientists began preparing the first experiments aimed at interacting with the warship. High-energy pulses designed to probe weaknesses were calculated and tested in simulations. Orbital maneuvers were planned to observe responses. Communication arrays were adjusted to detect even the faintest fluctuations in the ship's energy output. Humanity was no longer passive. Every decision, every test, every experiment was a step toward understanding a colossal threat, and potentially toward survival. The Empire, observing silently, recorded every human action. The responses of governments, scientists, and ordinary citizens were carefully analyzed. Humans were small, fragile, and emotional, yet they were adaptable, creative, and cooperative in ways that few civilizate. Humanity had spent weeks preparing, observing, and learning. The awakening of the Empire's warship had changed everything. No longer could nations act independently. No longer could individuals assume safety. Every decision mattered. The scientists, engineers, and military strategists worked together day and night, running calculations, testing simulations, and discussing strategies that could offer even a slim chance against the colossal enemy hovering silently above the planet. For the first time, humanity realized that brute force alone would not succeed. Conventional weapons could barely scratch the surface of the warship, and any direct attack could provoke an immediate and devastating retaliation. Instead, the plan had to be clever, subtle, and precise. A combination of technology, ingenuity, and timing might allow humanity to exploit the warship's energy patterns, its central control nodes, or the predictable aspects of its activation cycle. Every scientist, every engineer, and every strategist knew the stakes. The survival of millions depended on their decisions. Teams were formed, each focusing on a specific task. Some analyzed the warship's energy fluctuations, searching for patterns or weak points. Others studied its behavior in response to Earth-based activities, hoping to anticipate the next move. Military personnel coordinated orbital maneuvers, positioning satellites, drones, and small spacecraft to test the limits of the warship's interference. Engineers built experimental devices designed to disrupt energy flows or create interference within the ship's systems. Nothing could be left to chance. Humanity's ingenuity became its most important weapon. In the control centers on Earth, the atmosphere was tense. Large screens displayed simulations of the warship and its energy fields, while scientists ran complex algorithms designed to predict the ship's reactions. Every fluctuation in the warship's signals was analyzed in real time. A single miscalculation could result in disaster. Yet the team persevered, driven by determination and a shared understanding that failure was not an option. Ordinary citizens watched from afar as governments issued carefully worded statements about unusual events in the skies, preparing people psychologically for a world that was no longer as safe as it had seemed. The first operation was cautious, experimental. Using high-energy pulses targeted at specific coordinates in orbit, humanity sought to measure the warship's response. Satellites were equipped with sensors capable of detecting energy disruptions, and small probes were deployed to gather additional data. The pulses were brief, controlled, and calculated to avoid provoking a full-scale attack. Scientists watched nervously as the signals left Earth, transmitted across millions of kilometers of space. Every detail was recorded. Every reaction from the warship was analyzed. Humanity had become students in the study of survival, learning from each interaction, no matter how small. The Empire, observing silently, noted humanity's actions with interest. From their distant vantage point, they recorded each maneuver, each experiment, each subtle attempt to probe weaknesses. Humans were clever, adaptable, and surprisingly coordinated. The Empire's council debated the next step. Should they push the warship further, test humanity's responses more aggressively, or remain patient? For now, they chose observation. Each human action revealed more about their capabilities, their creativity, and their willingness to act despite overwhelming odds. As the first energy pulses reached the warship, sensors recorded subtle reactions. Its massive systems shifted, redistributed power, and emitted small bursts of energy, testing the limits of human interference. The scientists on Earth analyzed the results carefully. They were learning faster than expected. The warship, while overwhelmingly powerful, was not infallible. Its enormous size and energy output made it predictable in certain patterns. Humanity could exploit these patterns, but only with precision, timing, and coordination on a scale never attempted before. Encouraged by the initial results, humanity escalated its efforts. Coordinated orbital maneuvers, energy pulses, and experiments continued, each designed to probe, confuse, or disrupt the warship's systems. Engineers worked tirelessly, refining devices, recalibrating satellites, and adjusting algorithms. Military strategists coordinated with scientists, ensuring that every action in space aligned with the larger plan. Humanity was acting as a single organism, a collective intelligence guided by the urgent need to survive. Ordinary citizens contributed in indirect ways. Observers recorded unusual phenomena, shared videos of strange lights, and reported subtle anomalies in communications or electronics. These observations were fed into the central intelligence network, adding another layer of data for scientists and strategists. Humanity's global collaboration was unprecedented. Borders, politics, and rivalries were set aside. The survival of the species became the primary concern, uniting people in a way that nothing else could. The Empire's warship responded gradually. Subtle bursts of energy interfered with satellites, disrupted communications, and caused minor anomalies in power grids. Each reaction was noted by Earth's teams, who adjusted their strategies accordingly. Humanity learned quickly. Patience and observation were as important as action. The warship's intelligence was vast, but its responses were predictable in patterns. By exploiting these patterns, humans began to gain a tentative understanding of the enemy, despite the massive disparity in power. The operation was not without danger. Some satellites were lost, communication systems temporarily disrupted, and a few small spacecraft were damaged. Yet each setback became a learning opportunity. Engineers recalibrated devices, scientists refined algorithms, and strategists adjusted plans. Humanity's response was adaptive, resilient, and relentless. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, people refused to surrender. Their determination became a force of its own, pushing the species to innovate, to experiment, and to survive. Weeks passed as humanity continued the delicate dance with the warship. Small victories were celebrated quietly. Successful pulses that disrupted the warship's energy distribution, minor interference that provided new data, and simulations that predicted the enemy's next moves. All were milestones. Each achievement reinforced a collective understanding. Survival required intelligence, coordination, and courage. Brute force alone would not succeed. Humanity needed ingenuity, adaptability, and unity. The Empire continued its watch. From their perspective, humans were remarkable. They were small, fragile, and emotional, yet surprisingly resourceful. Their ability to organize, adapt, and collaborate under extreme pressure was impressive. The Council debated whether to increase the warship's activity, but ultimately, they chose patience. Observing humanity's responses provided more insight than immediate confrontation could. The warship remained largely non-destructive, a silent observer and test, though its potential for devastation was always clear. In laboratories and command centers, the young physicist and his team led efforts to anticipate the warship's next moves. Every signal, every fluctuation, every subtle change was analyzed. Simulations ran continuously, predicting responses to energy pulses, orbital adjustments, and experimental interference. The scale of the operation was staggering. Humanity had to think in new ways, beyond conventional physics, beyond traditional strategy, and beyond the limits of previous imagination. Public awareness grew subtly. Governments released information about unusual atmospheric events, electromagnetic disturbances, and satellite malfunctions. People were informed enough to understand that the world was facing a serious challenge, but not so much as to incite panic. Humanity's ability to adapt to this new reality became apparent in daily life. People observed the skies, noted unusual phenomena, and prepared for potential emergencies. The sense of being part of a larger struggle united communities in small, meaningful ways. As the operation progressed, the first coordinated plan to exploit the warship's potential weak points was developed. Using a combination of energy pulses, targeted orbital maneuvers, and synchronized observations from satellites and ground stations, humanity aimed to disrupt the ship's control systems temporarily. The strategy was risky. A miscalculation could provoke a catastrophic response. Yet the potential payoff was enormous. Humanity could gain critical insight, delay further activation, or even create a vulnerability to exploit in the future. The execution of the plan was tense. Scientists monitored every system, engineers adjusted equipment in real time, and military strategists coordinated movements across multiple continents. Satellites transmitted pulses, probes adjusted trajectories, and algorithms calculated precise timing. The world watched silently, aware that the smallest error could be disastrous. And then, slowly, the plan began to take effect. Initial results were promising. The warship responded with minor energy surges, but its systems temporarily fluctuated in response to humanity's actions. Sensors recorded these fluctuations, providing the first concrete evidence of exploitable patterns. The operation had not destroyed the warship, nor even significantly damaged it, but it had achieved something crucial. Proof that humanity could influence events, disrupt systems, and learn from direct interaction with an overwhelming force. The success sparked cautious optimism. Humanity realized that survival would require patience, intelligence, and coordination, but that their ingenuity could. Humanity's long weeks of study and sleepless nights had brought the world to a single moment. The Empire's planet-sized warship now floated like a second moon in the darkness above Earth, silent but alive. Scientists, soldiers, and civilians all understood one truth. Whatever they did next would decide whether humankind continued to exist or became only a story told among the stars. Inside research centers, the air carried a sharp tension. Coffee cups, blinking screens, and tired eyes filled every room. Teams across continents compared data, ran simulations, and argued over the smallest details. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but fear sat beside everyone like a shadow. The warship's systems pulsed in patterns that felt deliberate, almost curious. Each pulse rattled the upper atmosphere and left strange trails of light that drifted across the night sky. The scientists leading the analysis agreed that attacking directly would be useless. Humanity's weapons could barely scratch the metal hides of their own spacecraft. They would vanish against the armor of a planet-sized ship. If humanity was to survive, it had to think differently, use knowledge as its weapon. So the plan became one of disruption, not destruction. The goal was to confuse, to slow, to learn. Small satellites were fitted with experimental transmitters built to mimic parts of the warship's own signals. The hope was that by sending carefully crafted echoes back, they could trigger minor responses and expose weak spots. Around the world, teams built these devices in underground labs and secret hangars. There was no pride left in national flags. Everything was done under one symbol, Earth. When the first wave of transmitters launched, billions watched live streams in quiet awe. Dots of light left the atmosphere, fading into darkness. In command rooms, scientists held their breath. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then the monitors began to flicker. Faint ripples appeared in the warship's energy readings. It had noticed. The response was not an attack, but a test of its own. Massive waves of electromagnetic force rolled through orbit, knocking several satellites offline. Power grids in 2 major cities dimmed briefly, and aircraft radios filled with static. Yet within that chaos lay the first breakthrough. The warship's reactions followed measurable rhythms. It was not random. It was thinking. That discovery changed everything. Engineers began to map those rhythms like a heartbeat. Mathematicians built predictive models, showing when the warship's attention shifted from one sector of orbit to another. Every time it pulsed, it revealed more about itself. Humanity was slowly learning the language of its movements. Meanwhile, ordinary people continued their lives under strange new skies. Children pointed to glowing arcs that shimmered above the horizon. Farmers noticed their compasses twitching. In cities, people watched enormous auroras that painted the night with green and violet light. The unknown had become part of daily life. Fear remained, but curiosity grew beside it. Humanity was beginning to understand that survival also meant learning who or what was watching them. In secret meetings, world leaders approved the next step, Operation Mirror. The goal was to create a coordinated burst of energy from hundreds of satellites, timed precisely with the warship's pulse cycle. If successful, it could briefly distort the ship's energy flow and allow scientists to scan deeper inside. The operation demanded perfect timing. Every nation contributed resources, supercomputers, rockets, tracking systems. The countdown stretched across time zones. On the night of the launch, the world went silent. Families sat near radios. Pilots hovered above clouds. Soldiers stared at radar screens waiting for the signal. When the final second ticked down, the sky lit up. A web of light spread across orbit as hundreds of beams fired simultaneously. For a heartbeat, Earth glowed like a sun. Then came the silence, the long, unbearable silence before the warship reacted. It answered with a single pulse so strong it shook the ionosphere. Static washed over the planet. Power failed in several regions and satellites tumbled out of alignment. But the readings that followed stunned everyone. For the briefest moment, the warship's inner systems had flickered. The interference had worked. In that flicker, humanity glimpsed part of its structure. Massive chambers, energy conduits, and a central core that seemed to control everything. It was only a fragment of information, yet it proved the impossible. The warship could be touched, disrupted, maybe even slowed. The celebration inside control centers was quiet but emotional. Tears fell. Exhausted people hugged one another. For the first time, hope felt real. The Empire's observers noticed as well. Reports from their distant command stations spoke of unexpected sophistication. Humanity's attempt, though primitive by galactic standards, was bold and coordinated. The council overseeing the test debated whether to end the experiment or push it further. In the end, they chose to continue watching. The humans, they agreed, were teaching them something about persistence. Days turned into weeks as scientists refined their models. They discovered that the warship's pulse pattern changed after every human action, as if adapting to learn. It was becoming harder to predict. Each experiment gave new data but also carried greater risk.
One misstep might draw real retaliation.
Still, humanity pressed forward, knowing that hesitation could be just as dangerous as failure. Smaller operations followed. Some involved sending reflective drones close to the warship's energy fields. Others used ground-based lasers to study distortions in the atmosphere. Every result, success or failure, fed the growing network of knowledge. The shared databases now linked every major university, observatory, and defense agency on Earth. Rivalries that had once defined humanity were dissolving under the weight of a common purpose. The world outside laboratories began to change too. Art, music, and stories reflected the new reality. Painters captured the silver glow of the warship above city skylines. Singers wrote about courage under the unknown sky. Humanity was afraid, but it was also inspired. People began to believe that even if they couldn't win, they could stand. In one control center, during a quiet night shift, analysts noticed something strange. The warship's pulse had slowed slightly, then repeated a pattern seen weeks earlier. It was almost as if it had paused to watch. No one knew what that meant. Was it curiosity or was it preparing for something larger? Whatever the reason, it gave humanity a window of calm. Using that pause, engineers tested new shielding technologies, hoping to protect vital infrastructure on Earth. They reinforced satellites with energy dampeners, strengthened communication networks, and built underground command hubs. The more they learned, the more they prepared for the day when observation might turn into confrontation. Still, the Empire's ship remained motionless, massive and patient. It never fired a weapon, never moved closer, yet its presence pressed down like a weight on every mind. Each person felt it differently. Some feared it, some hated it, and others wondered if it was a test designed to see whether humanity could rise above fear itself. Months had passed since the first signal, and Earth was no longer the same planet. Nations that once competed were now partners. Scientists spoke in real time across oceans. Every new discovery was shared instantly. Humanity had become, in a way, the very thing it had struggled to achieve for centuries. A single species united by purpose. And that unity became its greatest strength. The Empire noticed. Their analysts reported that the humans had achieved what countless other civilizations had failed to do under similar pressure. Instead of collapsing, they had organized. Instead of surrendering, they had learned. For the first time, some among the Empire's ranks began to question whether awakening the warship had been wise. Yet the test was not over. Far above, sensors deep within the warship stirred once more. Energy readings spiked, and the faint hum that echoed through space grew louder. Humanity's instruments detected it instantly. The warship was preparing something new, something larger than before. On Earth, sirens sounded in major observatories. Scientists raced to their consoles. Military teams moved into alert positions. Every eye turned toward the screens as the readings climbed higher and higher. The warship's next action would either confirm humanity's survival or bring an end to everything they had built. And as the energy built, a strange calm settled over the planet. People stepped out of their homes looking up at the night sky. They could see it now with the naked eye, a faint glowing ring circling a dark center. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. No one knew what would happen next, but one thing had become clear. Humanity had proven that it would not vanish quietly. It had learned, adapted, and found strength in unity. Whatever came, they would face it together. The warship's glow brightened once more, casting silver light across oceans and mountains. Instruments around the world trembled, and somewhere in the heart of the Empire, observers leaned closer to their screens, eager to see what these stubborn, creative beings would do next. The test was entering its final stage.